I brought my mom and brother from Brazil to visit me in the US and ended up emotionally destroyed in my own home. After a year apart, I paid for everything, business class flights, luxury accommodations, every single expense, thinking I was giving them the trip of a lifetime. Instead, I watched my own mother systematically try to destroy my marriage and turn my 15-year-old brother against me, all while living under my roof. My name is Amanda Rivera, and I'm 32 years old. What I'm about to tell you changed everything I thought I knew about family, love, and the people who are supposed to protect you most. Growing up in Sao Paulo, my mom Isabella was everything to me. She was this vibrant, charismatic woman who commanded every room she entered. My dad passed away when I was 18, and suddenly it was just Isabella, my little brother Lucas, and me against the world. She was fierce, protective, and had this way of making you feel like you were the most important person alive when she focused her attention on you. Lucas was born when I was 17, and from the moment he came into this world, I felt like his second mother. I changed his diapers, helped with his first words, taught him how to ride a bike. Isabella always said I was more patient with him than she ever was. "Amanda, you're going to be such a wonderful mother someday," she'd tell me as I helped Lucas with his homework or read him bedtime stories. "You have this gift with children that I never had." Back then, those words felt like the highest praise. Isabella worked long hours as a corporate executive, and I naturally filled the gaps. When Lucas scraped his knee, he'd run to me. When he had nightmares, he'd climb into my bed. When he needed someone to cheer him on at soccer games, I was there in the stands with my homemade signs. We had this beautiful, unbreakable bond that felt more precious than anything in the world. The three of us lived in this comfortable routine for years. Isabella provided the structure and discipline, I provided the nurturing and emotional support, and Lucas thrived between us. We weren't wealthy, but we were comfortable. Isabella had worked her way up in her company and made enough to keep us in a nice apartment in a good neighborhood. Life felt stable, predictable, and full of love. When I turned 25, I got an incredible job opportunity with an American tech company. They offered me a position in their San Francisco office with a salary that would triple what I was making in Brazil. It was the kind of opportunity you don't turn down, but leaving meant leaving Lucas behind. He was only 10 at the time, and the thought of being apart from him broke my heart. "You have to go," Isabella insisted when I hesitated. "This is your chance to build the life you deserve. Lucas and I will be fine. But what if he forgets about me?" I asked, tears streaming down my face as I packed my suitcase. "What if I missed too much of his childhood?" Isabella pulled me into one of her rare, genuine hugs. "Amanda, you could move to the moon and that boy would still love you more than anyone else in this world. Go build your American dream. We'll visit, you'll visit, and nothing will change between you two." Those first few months in San Francisco were brutal. The loneliness was suffocating, and I cried myself to sleep most nights missing Lucas so much it physically hurt. But gradually, I found my footing. My job was challenging and rewarding, I made friends, and I started dating a wonderful man named David Chen who worked in the same building as me. David was everything I hadn't known I was looking for. He was kind, patient, incredibly smart, and had this dry sense of humor that could make me laugh even on my worst days. He was second-generation Chinese American, born and raised in California, and he understood the complexity of navigating between cultures and family expectations. When I told him about Lucas and how much I missed him, David never made me feel like my devotion to my little brother was excessive or strange. "Family is everything," he'd say. "The fact that you love him so much just shows what kind of person you are." David and I dated for 2 years before he proposed, and it was the most romantic proposal I could have imagined. He flew me to Napa Valley for a weekend getaway, and on Sunday morning, as we were watching the sunrise over the vineyards, he got down on one knee with my grandmother's ring that Isabella had secretly sent him months earlier. "Amanda Rivera," he said, his voice shaking with emotion, "will you marry me and let me spend the rest of my life making you as happy as you make me?" I called Isabella and Lucas immediately after saying yes, and they were both over the moon. Lucas kept asking when he could visit and be in the wedding, and Isabella started making plans to come help with all the preparations. "I'm so proud of you, Minha Filha," Isabella said through happy tears during our video call. "You found your prince, just like I always knew you would." The wedding was perfect. David and I got married in a beautiful garden ceremony in Marin County with about 80 guests. Isabella and Lucas flew in 2 weeks before the wedding and stayed with us in our apartment. It was the first time they'd visited America, and I was so excited to show them everything: the Golden Gate Bridge, Fisherman's Wharf, Alcatraz, all the tourist spots. Lucas was 13 then and absolutely fascinated by everything. He kept taking pictures with David's professional camera and asking a million questions about how everything worked. "Can I come live with you guys when I'm older?" he asked one night as I was tucking him into the guest bed. "Of course you can," I promised, kissing his forehead. "You can come visit whenever you want, and when you're 18, if you want to go to college here, David and I will help you with everything." Isabella seemed genuinely happy during that visit. She loved David immediately, kept commenting on how well he treated me and how obvious it was that he adored me. She helped me pick out flowers for the reception, went dress shopping with me for the bridesmaids' dresses, and even gave a beautiful speech at the wedding about how proud she was to see me build such a wonderful life in America. "My daughter Amanda has always had this gift for making people feel loved," she said, raising her champagne glass. "David, you are so lucky to have found her, and Amanda, you deserve all the happiness in the world." After the wedding, David and I settled into married life. We bought a beautiful house in Mill Valley with 4 bedrooms, thinking ahead to the family we wanted to start someday. David got promoted to senior engineer at his company, and I was thriving in my role as well. We had this comfortable, happy routine where we'd video call with Isabella and Lucas every Sunday, and I'd send care packages with American clothes and gadgets that Lucas requested. But over time, I started noticing subtle changes in Isabella's behavior during our calls. She'd make little comments about how different I seemed, how American I was becoming. When I'd mention something David and I had done together, she'd get this look on her face like she was annoyed or disappointed. "You used to tell me everything," she said one Sunday when Lucas wasn't around. "Now I feel like I'm talking to a stranger." "Mom, that's not true," I protested. "I tell you about my job, my friends, everything that's happening here. But you don't tell me how you really feel," she insisted. "You don't tell me if you're homesick or if David is treating you well or if you regret leaving Brazil." The truth was, I wasn't homesick anymore. I loved my life in California, I adored my husband, and while I missed Isabella and Lucas terribly, I didn't regret my decision to move. But saying that felt like it would hurt her feelings, so I tried to reassure her in other ways. "Of course I miss you both every day," I'd tell her. "But I'm happy here, Mom. Really happy." She'd nod, but I could see she wasn't satisfied with that answer. It was like she wanted me to be miserable without them, like my happiness in America somehow diminished my love for my family in Brazil. The situation with Lucas also started shifting, though more subtly. He was 15 now, dealing with typical teenage stuff, and sometimes when we'd video call, he seemed distracted or uninterested in talking. Isabella would make excuses for him: "He's tired from school, he's out with friends, he's going through a phase," but I could feel him pulling away from me, and it broke my heart. "Maybe it's just normal teenage behavior," David would say when I'd get upset after a particularly short or cold conversation with Lucas. "Remember, you left when he was 10. He's becoming his own person now." But it felt like more than that. It felt like I was losing him, and I didn't know how to stop it from happening. That's when I decided to invite them both to visit for an extended stay. It had been almost a year since I'd seen them in person, and I thought that spending quality time together, just the 3 of us, plus David, would help rebuild those bonds that felt like they were slipping away. "What if I flew you both out here for a month?" I suggested during one of our Sunday calls. "Lucas, you could see what American high schools are like, and Mom, you could finally see more of California than just the wedding venues." Lucas's eyes lit up for the first time in months. "Really? For a whole month?" "Really," I promised. "Business class flights, everything paid for. I want you both to see what my life is really like here." Isabella seemed pleased but also a bit suspicious. "That's very generous, Amanda, but you don't need to spend so much money on us." "I want to," I insisted. "You're my family. Let me do this for you." After some back and forth, they agreed to come for 4 weeks in July. I was absolutely thrilled. I started planning everything: which restaurants to take them to, what sights to show them, how to make Lucas's visit educational and fun. David was supportive as always, even helping me research teen-friendly activities in the Bay Area. "This is going to be amazing," I told David as we prepared the guest rooms. "Finally, Lucas will see that I haven't changed, that I'm still the same person who loves him more than anything." I had no idea I was about to invite my own destruction into my home. The day Isabella and Lucas arrived, I was at San Francisco International Airport 2 hours early, pacing around the international arrivals area like a caged animal. David had taken the day off work to come with me, and he kept laughing at how nervous I was. "Babe, you're acting like you're meeting strangers," he teased. "They're your family." "I know, but it's been so long," I said, checking my phone for the 100th time to see if their flight was still on schedule. What if things are weird? What if Lucas really has outgrown me? When they finally walked through those sliding doors, my heart nearly exploded with joy. Lucas had grown at least 4 inches since the wedding and looked so much older, but when he saw me, his face broke into this huge grin and he ran toward me like he was still that 10-year-old boy I'd left behind. "Amanda," he shouted, throwing his arms around me in a bear hug. "I missed you so much." I started crying immediately, holding him tight and breathing in that familiar smell of his shampoo. "I missed you too, little brother. Look how tall you are." Isabella approached more slowly, smiling but with something guarded in her expression. She looked elegant as always, dressed in expensive clothes and carrying designer luggage that I'd sent money for over the years. "Hello, Minha Filha," she said, embracing me warmly but briefly. "Thank you for bringing us here." The first few hours were perfect. We drove across the Golden Gate Bridge as the sun was setting, and Lucas was practically hanging out the car window trying to take pictures of everything. Isabella seemed genuinely impressed with our house and kept commenting on how beautiful everything was. "You've built a wonderful life here, Amanda," she said as I showed her around our home. "David, you take very good care of my daughter." "She takes care of me just as much," David replied, putting his arm around my waist. "We take care of each other." That first night, I cooked Lucas's favorite Brazilian dinner, feijoada with all the traditional sides. We sat around our dining room table, and for a moment, it felt just like old times. Lucas was telling us all about school and his friends, asking David about his work, and seeming genuinely excited to be there. But I started noticing small things that felt off. When I'd laugh at something David said, Isabella would get this tight expression on her face. When David complimented the meal, she made a comment about how I never used to cook back in Brazil. When Lucas mentioned something about wanting to study computer science like David, Isabella quickly changed the subject. "Amanda, you could have married someone with more status," she said out of nowhere as David was loading the dishwasher. "In Brazil, doctors and lawyers are much more respected than engineers." I felt my face flush with embarrassment. "Mom, David is incredibly successful and respected in his field. He's a senior engineer at one of the biggest tech companies in the world." "I'm just saying, you had options," she continued, not seeming to care that David could hear every word from the kitchen. "Remember that surgeon, Dr. Martinez, who was interested in you before you moved?" David came back into the dining room at that moment, and I could see from his expression that he'd heard the entire conversation. But he just smiled politely and said, "I'm going to let you all catch up. I'll be upstairs if you need anything." After he left, I turned to Isabella, trying to keep my voice calm. "Mom, that was incredibly rude. David is my husband, and I love him. Comments like that are hurtful and inappropriate." "I'm just making conversation," she said with a shrug. "I'm your mother. I'm allowed to have opinions." Lucas looked uncomfortable, shifting in his chair and staring at his plate. I could see this was already putting him in an awkward position, caught between his mother and me. "Let's not do this," I said, forcing a smile. "We're here to have a good time together. No more comments about my marriage, okay?" Isabella nodded, but I could tell she wasn't sorry. If anything, she looked pleased that she'd gotten under my skin. The next morning, I woke up early to make a special breakfast for everyone: pancakes, fresh fruit, Brazilian coffee that I'd ordered specially for their visit. David had already left for work, and I was looking forward to spending the day alone with Isabella and Lucas, just like old times. But when they came downstairs, the atmosphere was immediately tense. Isabella was dressed impeccably as always, but her expression was cold. Lucas seemed withdrawn and kept looking back and forth between us like he was waiting for something bad to happen. "Good morning," I said cheerfully, trying to set a positive tone. "I made your favorite pancakes, Lucas. And Mom, I got that Brazilian coffee you love." "Thank you," Isabella said curtly, sitting down at the table without making eye contact. Lucas mumbled a thank you and started eating in silence. The contrast with the previous night's dinner conversation was stark and confusing. "So, what should we do today?" I asked, trying to fill the silence. "We could drive down to Monterey, or go into San Francisco, or just hang out here by the pool." "Whatever you think is best," Isabella replied in a tone that suggested she didn't actually care what we did. I spent the entire day trying to recapture the warmth from the night before, but it was like trying to hug a ghost. Isabella was polite but distant, making subtle criticisms about everything: the way I drove, the restaurants I chose, even the clothes I was wearing. "You dress so casually now," she observed as we walked through downtown Sausalito. "In Brazil, you always took pride in looking elegant." I looked down at my sundress and sandals, the exact kind of outfit I'd always worn during summer in Brazil. "Mom, I'm dressed exactly the same way I've always dressed." "If you say so," she replied with that infuriating shrug. Lucas remained mostly quiet throughout the day, but I caught him watching me with this new, analytical expression that I'd never seen before. It was like he was studying me, looking for flaws or changes that confirmed whatever Isabella had been telling him about me. That evening, when David got home from work, the three of us were sitting by the pool in uncomfortable silence. David immediately picked up on the tension. "How was everyone's day?" he asked, kissing me on the top of my head before sitting down beside me. "Fine," Isabella answered before I could respond. "Amanda showed us around the area." "That's great," David said, clearly sensing that it hadn't actually been great. "Tomorrow's Friday, so I was thinking maybe we could all drive up to Napa Valley for the weekend. There are some beautiful wineries, and I made reservations at this amazing restaurant in St. Helena." "That sounds wonderful," I said quickly, hoping a change of scenery might help reset the dynamic. Isabella nodded politely, but Lucas looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. This wasn't how I'd imagined our reunion at all. That night, after Isabella and Lucas had gone to bed, I broke down crying in David's arms. "I don't understand what's happening," I sobbed. "Yesterday Lucas was so happy to see me, and today he could barely look at me. And Mom is being so cold and critical about everything." David stroked my hair and held me close. "Maybe they're just tired from the travel and adjusting to the time difference. Give it a few more days." But deep down, I had a sinking feeling that this wasn't about jet lag. Something had shifted, and I was afraid I was losing them both all over again. The next day, we drove up to Napa Valley, and I was determined to make the weekend special. I'd booked us a beautiful suite at Auberge du Soleil with stunning views of the valley, and I had planned wine tastings and nice dinners that I thought Isabella would enjoy. But if anything, being in a more intimate setting made the tension worse. Isabella continued making passive-aggressive comments about everything. The resort was too flashy, the wine was overpriced, and the other guests were typical Americans with no class. During dinner at a beautiful restaurant in St. Helena, she looked around at the other diners and said loudly, "In Brazil, people dress properly when they go to nice restaurants. Here, everyone looks like they're going to the beach." I was mortified, especially when I noticed other guests turning to look at our table. "Mom, people dress differently here. It doesn't mean they have less class." "I'm just making an observation," she said with that same maddening shrug. Lucas spent most of the dinner staring at his phone, barely participating in conversation. When I tried to ask him about school or his friends, he gave one-word answers. When David tried to engage him about soccer or video games, Lucas was polite but distant. That night, back at the resort, I was getting ready for bed when David's phone buzzed with a text message. He looked at it, frowned, and showed me the screen. It was from Isabella. "David, can we talk privately tomorrow? There are some things about Amanda that I think you should know." My blood ran cold. What could she possibly want to tell you about me that I wouldn't know about? David's jaw was tight with anger. "I have no idea, but I'm not having private conversations with your mother behind your back. This is completely inappropriate." He immediately texted back, "Isabella, if there's something you want to discuss, we can talk with Amanda present. I don't have private conversations with family members about my wife." Isabella responded within minutes, "It's delicate. Better if we speak alone first." David showed me the message, and I felt sick to my stomach. What is she doing? What could she possibly want to tell you about me? "I don't know, but whatever it is, she can say it in front of both of us," David said firmly. "I'm not playing these games." I barely slept that night, running through every possible thing Isabella might want to say about me. Was she going to make up lies about my past? Try to convince David that I was unhappy in our marriage? I couldn't figure out her angle, but I knew it couldn't be anything good. The next morning, we all went down to breakfast at the resort restaurant. The atmosphere was even more tense than usual, if that was possible. Isabella kept looking at David with this expectant expression, clearly hoping he'd take her up on her offer to talk privately. I excused myself to go to the bathroom, planning to be gone for just a few minutes. But when I came back, I could see from across the restaurant that Isabella had leaned across the table and was speaking intently to David while Lucas sat between them looking uncomfortable. My heart started pounding as I hurried back to the table. David saw me approaching and immediately straightened up, his expression dark. "What's going on?" I asked, sitting back down. David looked directly at Isabella. "Your mother was just trying to have that private conversation we discussed last night." Isabella's face flushed red. No," David said firmly, cutting her off. "Whatever you want to say about Amanda, you can say it with her here. We don't have secrets in our marriage." I looked at Isabella, who was now looking trapped and angry. "Mom, what did you want to tell David about me?" She sat back in her chair, clearly realizing her plan had backfired. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. "Fine," she said, her voice taking on this cold, calculated tone. "David, I think you should know about Amanda's relationship with Carlos Mendoza 6 years ago." My stomach dropped. Carlos had been a coworker I'd briefly dated in Sao Paulo before I moved to America. It had been a messy situation. He was going through a divorce and hadn't been entirely honest about his timeline. When I found out he'd been lying to both me and his wife about the status of their separation, I ended things immediately. It had been a painful lesson about trusting people too quickly, but it was ancient history. David knew all about Carlos because I'd told him everything about my past relationships when we first got serious. There were no secrets between us. I know about Carlos, David said calmly. Amanda told me all about that situation years ago. What exactly is your point in bringing this up? Isabella looked shocked that her revelation had fallen flat. She'd clearly expected this to be some bombshell that would plant seeds of doubt in David's mind about my character or honesty. I thought you should know that Amanda doesn't always make good choices when it comes to men, she stammered. She made an excellent choice when she chose me, David replied, his voice steady but with steel underneath. And I made an excellent choice when I chose her. Isabella, I'm confused about what you're trying to accomplish here. The silence at the table was deafening. Lucas was staring at his plate, clearly mortified by the entire scene. Isabella looked like a cornered animal, realizing that her attempt to manipulate the situation had completely backfired. I'm just looking out for my daughter, she said weakly. By trying to sabotage her marriage? David asked, his tone becoming more pointed. Because that's what this feels like to me. Isabella started tearing up, playing the victim card. I'm sorry if I upset you. I just worry about Amanda being so far from home, with no family around to support her if something goes wrong. She has me, David said simply. And she has the family we've built together. If you're truly concerned about Amanda's well-being, then support her happiness instead of trying to undermine it. The rest of breakfast passed in agonizing silence. Isabella retreated into herself, alternating between looking wounded and shooting dark glances at David. Lucas seemed like he wanted to disappear entirely. And I felt like my world was tilting off its axis. After we got back to our room, I finally broke down. I can't believe she did that, I sobbed to David. She tried to turn you against me using something that happened 6 years ago, something she knows you already know about. David held me close, his own anger obvious. Amanda, I need you to understand something. Nothing your mother could say would ever change how I feel about you. Nothing. But what she just did was calculated and malicious, and it's completely unacceptable. I don't understand why she's doing this, I cried. She used to love you. At our wedding, she gave that beautiful speech about how lucky you were to have found me. Maybe that's the problem, David said quietly. Maybe she doesn't want you to be happy here because it means you're really gone from her life in Brazil. The drive back to Mill Valley was the longest 2 hours of my life. Isabella sat in the back seat with Lucas, maintaining her wounded silence. Occasionally I'd catch her whispering something to him, and he'd nod or shake his head in response. I felt like they were having conversations about me right behind my back, and I was powerless to stop it. When we got home, Isabella immediately went upstairs to the guest room and closed the door. She didn't come down for dinner, and when I knocked to ask if she wanted anything to eat, she said she wasn't feeling well and just wanted to rest. Maybe I should try to talk to her, I said to David as we sat in our living room that evening. Lucas had also disappeared upstairs, claiming he was tired. Absolutely not, David said firmly. She owes both of us an apology for what she pulled today. Don't go chasing after her to fix this when she's the one who caused it. But I couldn't help feeling like everything was falling apart, and somehow it was my fault for bringing them here in the first place. The next morning, Isabella still didn't come downstairs. I could hear her moving around in the guest room, and I knew she was awake, but she didn't emerge even when I called up that breakfast was ready. Lucas came down looking exhausted and miserable. When I tried to talk to him, he was monosyllabic and wouldn't make eye contact with me. Are you okay, little brother? I asked, sitting down next to him at the kitchen counter. He shrugged, pushing eggs around on his plate. I'm fine. You don't seem fine. You seem upset. Mom's upset, he said quietly. She says David was mean to her yesterday. My heart sank. Of course Isabella was spinning the story to make herself the victim and David the villain. Lucas, David wasn't mean to Mom. She tried to have a private conversation with him about me, and he told her that wasn't appropriate. He was protecting our marriage. Lucas looked up at me for the first time all morning, and I was shocked by the coldness in his expression. Maybe she was just trying to help. Help with what? I asked, genuinely confused. My marriage is fine. David and I are happy. Are you? He asked, and there was something challenging in his tone that I'd never heard before. Because Mom says you seem different. She says you've changed since you moved here. I felt like he'd punched me in the gut. Of course I've changed, Lucas. I've grown up. I've built a life. But I'm still the same person who loves you more than anything in the world. He stared at me for a long moment, then looked back down at his plate. If you say so. The casual dismissal in his voice broke something inside me. This was my little brother, the boy who used to crawl into my bed when he had nightmares, who called me when he needed help with homework, who told everyone I was his favorite person in the world. Now he was looking at me like I was a stranger, and I could see Isabella's influence in every doubt that flickered across his face. That afternoon, David came home early from work to find me crying in our bedroom. "She's turning him against me," I sobbed. "I can see it happening, and I don't know how to stop it. He used to adore me, and now he can barely stand to be in the same room as me." David sat on the bed and pulled me into his arms. "This is emotional manipulation, Amanda. Your mother is using Lucas as a weapon against you because her direct approach didn't work. But what if she's right?" I asked through my tears. "What if I have changed too much? What if I've become someone he can't relate to anymore?" "Stop," David said firmly. "You haven't changed in any negative way. You've grown into the incredible woman you were always meant to be. Your mother is threatened by your independence and success, so she's trying to make you doubt yourself." But knowing that intellectually didn't make the pain any less devastating. I was watching my relationship with Lucas disintegrate in real time, and I felt completely helpless to save it. Over the next few days, the pattern continued. Isabella remained holed up in the guest room, only emerging for brief meals where she maintained her wounded martyr act. She'd make little sighs and sad expressions, clearly hoping someone would ask her what was wrong so she could launch into her victim narrative. Lucas spent more and more time with her, and I could hear them talking behind the closed door for hours. Whatever she was saying to him, it was working. He became increasingly distant with me, and any attempts I made to connect with him were met with polite but cold responses. When I suggested activities we could do together, he'd say he was tired or not feeling well. When I tried to engage him in conversations about his interests, he'd give me short answers and find excuses to leave the room. When I caught him looking at me, there was this analytical, suspicious expression on his face that made me feel like a stranger in my own home. The worst part was seeing how it was affecting David too. He was trying so hard to be supportive of me while also being welcoming to my family, but the tension was wearing on all of us. I could see him getting frustrated with the situation, especially when Isabella would make passive-aggressive comments about American culture or our lifestyle. "In Brazil, families spend more time together," she'd say while watching David and me clean up after dinner. "Here, everyone is so busy with work and individual pursuits. We spend time together every evening and all weekend," David would reply evenly. "And we have dinner together every night." "It's different," Isabella would insist. "More, separate." Everything we did was wrong in her eyes. If we included her and Lucas in our routines, she'd criticize how we did things. If we gave them space to rest and adjust, she'd complain that we were being distant and unwelcoming. There was no winning. 2 weeks into their visit, I decided I had to try one more time to break through to both of them. I planned a special day trip to San Francisco, hitting all of Lucas's favorite spots from previous visits and ending with dinner at this amazing Brazilian restaurant I discovered. But when I suggested it at breakfast, Isabella immediately shot it down. "Lucas isn't feeling well today," she said, not even looking at him to confirm. "I think we should stay home and rest." Lucas nodded along with whatever she said, not making eye contact with me. I could see he was fine physically, but he was clearly following her lead and avoiding any one-on-one time with me. "Maybe tomorrow then?" I suggested hopefully. "We'll see," Isabella replied in a tone that clearly meant no. After breakfast, they both disappeared upstairs again, and I found myself alone in my own house, feeling more isolated than I had since those first lonely months in San Francisco 7 years ago. David found me sitting by the pool, staring at the water and trying not to cry. "This can't continue," he said, sitting down beside me. "Amanda, they've been here 2 weeks, and your mother hasn't had a single genuine conversation with either of us since that disaster in Napa. She's systematically poisoning your relationship with Lucas, and she's making our home feel hostile and uncomfortable." "I know," I whispered. "But what am I supposed to do? Kick them out? They're my family." "Family doesn't treat you this way," David said gently. "What your mother is doing isn't love, Amanda. It's control. She can't stand that you've built a life without her, so she's trying to destroy your peace and make you doubt everything good in your life." I knew he was right, but admitting it felt like giving up on the family relationships that had defined my entire identity. Isabella and Lucas weren't just my mother and brother, they were my connection to my dad, to my childhood, to the person I used to be. Losing them felt like losing pieces of myself. That evening, I made one last attempt to reach Lucas. I knocked on his door and asked if I could come in and talk to him. He was lying on his bed scrolling through his phone, and he barely looked up when I entered. Hey, little brother, I said, sitting on the edge of his bed. I feel like we haven't really gotten to spend any time together since you've been here. I've missed talking to you. He shrugged, still looking at his phone. We've talked. Not really. Not like we used to. Remember when you were younger and you'd tell me everything? About school, your friends, your dreams for the future. I was a kid then, he said, finally looking at me. I'm different now. I know you're growing up, and that's okay. I'm proud of the young man you're becoming. But that doesn't mean we can't still be close. Lucas sat up and looked at me with that same analytical expression I'd been seeing for weeks. Mom says you don't really understand what our life is like in Brazil anymore. She says living here has made you forget where you came from. The words hit me like a physical blow. Lucas, that's not true. I think about home every day. I send money to help with expenses, I call every week. I flew you both here because I wanted to share my life with you. But you chose to stay here, he said, and his voice was colder than I'd ever heard it. You chose David and this house and this life over being with us. I felt tears starting to form, but I tried to keep my voice steady. I chose to build a career and a marriage, but that doesn't mean I chose them over you. You'll always be one of the most important people in my life. Will I? He asked, and the doubt in his voice broke my heart. Because it feels like you have this whole life here that doesn't include us. And when we visit, you want us to fit into your American life instead of just being your family. I could hear Isabella's words in his voice, her perspective coloring everything he saw and felt. She had been systematically undermining my relationship with him, planting seeds of doubt and resentment that were now blooming into full rejection. Lucas, I love you exactly as you are, I said, reaching out to touch his arm. I don't want you to be anyone other than my little brother. But I also love my life here, and I hoped you could see that both things can be true. He pulled his arm away from my touch, and that small gesture felt like a door slamming shut between us. Maybe they can't, he said quietly. Maybe you had to choose, and you chose. After that conversation, I knew it was over. Whatever relationship Lucas and I had built over the first 15 years of his life was gone, replaced by suspicion and resentment that Isabella had carefully cultivated. He wasn't my little brother anymore. He was her ally in a war I hadn't even known we were fighting. The final week of their visit was the longest of my life. Isabella emerged from her room more frequently, but only to make pointed observations about our lifestyle and relationship. She'd comment on how David and I shared household chores, suggesting it wasn't natural for a man to help with cooking and cleaning. She'd criticize the way we spent our free time, implying that we were too focused on material things and not enough on family connections. In Brazil, we value different things, she'd say while watching David and me prepare dinner together. Family comes first, always. The implication was clear: by building a life in America, I had somehow betrayed my family values. And Lucas was absorbing every word, nodding along with her assessments of our lifestyle and my choices. David's patience was wearing thin. I could see it in the tension around his eyes when Isabella made her comments, in the way he'd excuse himself from the room when she started her passive-aggressive lectures. He was trying so hard to be respectful and welcoming, but Isabella was making it impossible. She's doing this on purpose, he said to me one night as we got ready for bed. She's trying to make us uncomfortable in our own home, trying to make you doubt your life here. I know, I replied, but my voice sounded defeated even to my own ears. I just don't know how to fight it without making things worse. You shouldn't have to fight your own mother for the right to be happy, David said, pulling me close. This isn't normal family behavior, Amanda. This is manipulation. 2 days before they were scheduled to leave, Isabella made her final move. I came home from running errands to find her sitting in our living room with Lucas, both of them looking like they'd been having an intense conversation. Amanda, Isabella said as I walked in, we need to talk. My stomach immediately knotted with anxiety. About what? About your future, she said, gesturing for me to sit down. Lucas and I have been talking, and we're both concerned about you. I sat down cautiously, looking back and forth between them. Lucas wouldn't meet my eyes, which was never a good sign. Concerned about what? I asked. Isabella took a deep breath, putting on what I now recognized as her performance face, the expression she wore when she wanted to seem reasonable and caring while delivering a devastating blow. We think you should come home to Brazil, she said simply. This American life isn't good for you. I stared at her in shock. What are you talking about? I love my life here. You think you do, she replied in that condescending tone that made my skin crawl. But look at what it's cost you. You've lost touch with your culture, your family, your real values. You're playing house with a man who doesn't understand where you come from. David is my husband, I said, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. And this isn't playing house. This is my real life, the life I chose and built. But is it making you happy? Lucas spoke up for the first time, and his question caught me off guard. Really happy, Amanda? Because you seem different. Stressed. Like you're trying too hard to be someone you're not. I felt like I was being attacked from both sides. I am happy, Lucas. Happier than I've ever been. Yes, building a life is hard work, but that doesn't mean I'm not fulfilled by it. Isabella shook her head sadly. Amanda, you're 32 years old. Most of your friends in Brazil are married with children by now. Here, you're just playing career woman, postponing real life. This is real life. I protested. My career, my marriage, the home David and I have built together, this is all real, and it's all important to me. But what about family? Isabella pressed. What about Lucas? He needs you, Amanda. He's growing up without his sister, and it's affecting him more than you realize. I looked at Lucas, hoping to see some sign that he disagreed with her assessment, but his expression was guarded and unreadable. Lucas, is that how you feel? I asked him directly. Do you feel like I abandoned you? He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him struggling with his answer. I miss how things used to be. When you lived at home and we were all together. But that doesn't mean I made the wrong choice by moving here, I said desperately. People grow up, they build their own lives. That's normal and healthy. Is it healthy if it means cutting yourself off from the people who love you most? Isabella asked. Amanda, you used to call every day. Now it's once a week, and half the time you seem distracted or in a hurry to get off the phone. There was some truth to that accusation, and it stung. As I'd gotten more comfortable in my American life, my contact with them had become more routine and less emotionally urgent. But that felt like natural growth, not abandonment. I'm not cutting myself off, I said. I'm here, aren't I? I flew you both here business class, I took time off work, I've been trying to show you how much you mean to me. By showing off your American lifestyle, Isabella replied. By trying to impress us instead of just being with us. I felt tears starting to form, but I was determined not to cry in front of them. This felt like an ambush, like they'd planned this conversation to corner me and make me feel guilty about every choice I'd made since leaving Brazil. What exactly are you asking me to do? I said finally. Quit my job? Leave David? Move back to Sao Paulo and pretend the last 7 years never happened? I'm asking you to remember what's really important, Isabella said. Family is forever, Amanda. Jobs and houses and even marriages can end, but family is the only thing that lasts. The irony of her saying that while actively trying to destroy my marriage wasn't lost on me. But Lucas was nodding along with her words, and seeing his agreement felt like a knife in my heart. Lucas, I said, turning to face him fully. Do you really want me to leave David and move back to Brazil? He looked uncomfortable, glancing at Isabella before answering. I want you to be happy, he said carefully. But I also want you to be my sister again, not this stranger who visits sometimes. That's when I realized the full scope of what Isabella had accomplished. She hadn't just turned Lucas against my life in America, she'd convinced him that I had become a fundamentally different person, someone he couldn't relate to or trust. In his mind, the choice wasn't between Brazil and America, it was between being his sister and being someone else entirely. I am your sister, I said, my voice breaking slightly. I will always be your sister, no matter where I live or what choices I make. Then prove it, Isabella said, sensing that she had me on the defensive. Come home with us. Take a break from this life and remember who you really are. Before I could respond, I heard David's car in the driveway. He was coming home from work early, probably sensing that I needed support. Isabella immediately stood up, smoothing her clothes and putting on her innocent expression. Think about what we've said, Amanda, she said as David's key turned in the front door. You don't have to decide right now, but don't wait too long. Some doors close if you don't walk through them when they're open. David walked in to find the three of us sitting in tense silence, and he immediately knew something was wrong. How's everyone doing? He asked cautiously, setting down his laptop bag and coming over to kiss me on the forehead. Fine, Isabella replied quickly. We were just having a family conversation. David looked at my face and could clearly see that I'd been fighting back tears. Amanda, are you okay? I nodded, not trusting my voice to stay steady if I tried to speak. Isabella and Lucas excused themselves to go upstairs, leaving David and me alone in the living room. What happened? David asked immediately, sitting down beside me and taking my hands. I told him everything, Isabella's demand that I move back to Brazil, Lucas's accusations that I'd become a stranger, their coordinated attack on every choice I'd made since leaving Sao Paulo. David listened without interrupting, but I could see his anger building with each detail. This is exactly what I was afraid of, he said when I finished. She brought Lucas here not to reconnect with you, but to make you feel guilty enough to give up your life here. But what if they're right? I asked, the doubt that Isabella had planted beginning to take root. What if I have changed too much? What if I'm prioritizing the wrong things? Amanda, listen to me, David said firmly, taking my face in his hands. You haven't changed in any way that matters. You're still the same caring, loving, loyal person you've always been. You've just grown into your full potential. Your mother is threatened by your independence and success because it means she can't control you anymore. But Lucas is 15 years old and being manipulated by his mother, David interrupted. He's not old enough to understand the complexity of adult choices and relationships. Isabella is using his natural adolescent emotions to make you feel guilty about living your own life. I knew David was right intellectually, but emotionally I felt shattered. The idea that I might have to choose between my life with David and my relationship with Lucas was devastating. And Isabella knew exactly which buttons to push to make me doubt everything I'd built. That night at dinner, the atmosphere was even more tense than usual. Isabella kept making comments about how much she'd miss having me close when they returned to Brazil, how hard it would be for Lucas to go back to not having his sister around. Maybe this visit has helped you realize how much you've been missing, she said while cutting her food. Sometimes you don't know what you've lost until you get a taste of having it back. David set down his fork with more force than necessary. Isabella, what exactly are you trying to say? I'm saying that family is important, she replied innocently. I'm saying that Amanda has a family in Brazil who loves and needs her. And she has a family here too, David said pointedly. A husband who adores her and supports her dreams. Of course, Isabella said with that maddening smile. I'm just wondering if maybe it's time for Amanda to think about what she really wants for her future. Lucas was watching this exchange like a tennis match, and I could see him absorbing every implication. In his mind, this was probably confirmation that my marriage was unstable and my life in America was somehow temporary or artificial. After dinner, I escaped to our bedroom and called my best friend Maria, who still lived in São Paulo. I needed to talk to someone who understood both sides of my life. Amanda, what's wrong? Maria asked immediately, hearing the distress in my voice. I told her everything that had happened over the past 3 weeks, from Isabella's attempt to sabotage my marriage to her ultimatum that afternoon. This is crazy, Maria said when I finished. Your mom is being completely manipulative. You know that, right? But what if she's right about some things? I asked. What if I have lost touch with my family and my culture? Amanda, you call them every week, you send money to help with expenses, you flew them to America for a month-long vacation. How is that losing touch? And as for culture, you can be Brazilian and live in America. Those aren't mutually exclusive. Isabella keeps saying that I've changed, that I'm not the same person I used to be. Of course you've changed. Maria exclaimed. You were 25 when you left Brazil. You're 32 now. You're supposed to change and grow. That's called being a healthy adult. Talking to Maria helped clarify things, but it didn't make the emotional pain any less intense. I was still losing Lucas, and I still felt like I was being forced to choose between two parts of my identity. The next day was their last full day with us, and I woke up with a heavy heart knowing that this might be the last time I'd see Lucas for years, possibly forever. If Isabella succeeded in her mission, she'd make sure he grew up believing that I'd chosen America over family, that I was selfish and disloyal. I made his favorite breakfast one last time and tried to create some positive final memories, but the damage was already done. Lucas was polite but distant, and Isabella maintained her martyred expression, sighing sadly whenever she looked at me. I'm going to miss this house, she said as we sat on the patio after breakfast. It's so beautiful and peaceful. It must be hard to leave such luxury behind. The comment was classic Isabella, seemingly positive but with a barb hidden inside. The implication was that my attachment to material comfort was part of what was keeping me from doing the right thing and moving back to Brazil. That afternoon, while Lucas was taking a nap and Isabella was packing, David found me sitting by the pool staring into space. What are you thinking about? He asked, settling into the chair beside me. I'm thinking about that first day they arrived, I said quietly. Lucas hugged me so tight, and for a moment it felt like nothing had changed. I thought we were going to have this amazing month together, rebuilding our connection. You tried everything you could to make that happen, David said. This isn't your fault, Amanda. Isn't it, though? I asked, turning to look at him. Maybe if I'd handled things differently, if I'd been more sensitive to how they were feeling. Stop, David said firmly. You were nothing but loving and generous. You paid for business class flights, you took time off work, you planned activities you thought they'd enjoy. You opened your home and your heart. The fact that your mother used all of that as ammunition against you says everything about her character and nothing about yours. But I'm still losing Lucas, I said, my voice breaking. He's going to go back to Brazil tomorrow thinking that I chose material things over family, that I don't love him enough to sacrifice for him. Maybe, David said sadly. But Amanda, you can't sacrifice your entire life to prove a point to a 15-year-old who's being manipulated. And if you give in to Isabella's ultimatum, what message does that send to Lucas about building an independent life? About following your dreams? About standing up for yourself? I knew David was right, but the logical part of my brain was being overwhelmed by the emotional devastation of watching my relationship with Lucas crumble before my eyes. That evening, we had our final dinner together. I'd made reservations at the same Brazilian restaurant where we'd celebrated my engagement to David 3 years earlier, hoping to end the visit on a positive note. But the atmosphere was heavy with unspoken tensions and impending goodbye. Isabella spent most of the dinner making comments about how different Brazilian food tasted in America, how much she missed authentic flavors and ingredients. Lucas barely spoke, pushing food around his plate and checking his phone. Tomorrow's going to be hard, Isabella said as we waited for dessert. Going back to our real life after experiencing all this. This is my real life too, I said quietly. It's not a vacation or a fantasy. It's the life I've built. I know, sweetheart, Isabella said with false sympathy. But sometimes the life we build isn't the life we're meant to have. David's jaw tightened, but he managed to keep his voice calm. Isabella, Amanda has built exactly the life she's meant to have. She's successful, fulfilled, and surrounded by people who love and support her. Of course, Isabella agreed with that infuriating smile. I'm just saying that sometimes we think we know what we want, but life has other plans. The conversation felt like a chess match where Isabella kept moving pieces while pretending she wasn't playing a game at all. Every comment was designed to plant doubt, to make me question my choices, to suggest that my life in America was somehow illegitimate or temporary. After dinner, we drove home in silence. I kept glancing at Lucas in the rearview mirror, memorizing his face and wondering when I'd see him again. He was staring out the window, lost in his own thoughts, probably processing everything Isabella had told him about me and our family. That night, I lay awake listening to David breathe beside me, knowing that tomorrow everything would change. Isabella and Lucas would fly back to Brazil, and I'd be left to deal with the wreckage of relationships that had once been the most important things in my world. I thought about the little boy who used to climb into my bed when he had nightmares, who called me his best friend, who made me cards for my birthday with pictures of the two of us surrounded by hearts. That boy was gone, replaced by a teenager who saw me as a stranger, someone who'd betrayed the family for selfish reasons. And maybe the worst part was that I couldn't even be angry with him. He was 15 years old, trying to navigate his own emotions about growing up and changing family dynamics. Isabella had taken advantage of his natural confusion and turned it into a weapon against me. The next morning, I woke up early to make one final breakfast together. I found Isabella already dressed and sitting in the kitchen with her suitcase by the door, as if she couldn't wait to leave. "Good morning," I said, trying to keep my voice cheerful. "I thought I'd make pancakes one more time before you go." "That's very thoughtful," Isabella replied, but her tone suggested she found my effort pathetic rather than sweet. Lucas came downstairs looking tired and withdrawn. He mumbled a good morning and sat down at the counter, avoiding eye contact with me. As I cooked, I tried to think of something meaningful to say, some way to bridge the gap that had opened between us. But every potential conversation starter felt loaded with the tension of everything that had been said and implied over the past few weeks. "Lucas," I said finally, setting a plate of pancakes in front of him. "I want you to know that no matter what happens, no matter where I live or what choices I make, you'll always be one of the most important people in my life." He looked up at me for a moment, and I saw a flicker of the little boy I'd raised. But then the shutters came down again, and he nodded politely without saying anything. David came down as we were finishing breakfast, and immediately the dynamic in the room shifted. Isabella straightened up and put on her pleasant mask, while Lucas became even more withdrawn. "All packed and ready?" David asked, his tone carefully neutral. "Yes, thank you for your hospitality," Isabella replied formally. "It's been educational." The drive to the airport was excruciating. Isabella sat in the front passenger seat making small talk about the weather and the traffic, while Lucas sat in the back staring out the window. I kept trying to catch his eye in the rearview mirror, but he was determinedly avoiding looking at me. At the airport, as we stood outside the international terminal with their luggage, the reality of the goodbye hit me like a physical blow. This might be the last time I saw Lucas before he became an adult, before Isabella's version of our story became his permanent truth about who I was and what I'd chosen. Isabella hugged me first, and it felt like embracing a stranger. "Take care of yourself, Amanda," she said, pulling back to look at me with what might have been genuine sadness. Remember what we talked about. Some opportunities don't come twice. Then it was Lucas's turn. He stepped forward reluctantly, and I pulled him into the tightest hug I could manage without embarrassing him. I love you so much, little brother, I whispered in his ear. That will never change, no matter what. He hugged me back, but it was brief and perfunctory. When he pulled away, he looked at me with that same analytical expression I'd come to dread. Bye, Amanda, he said quietly. Thanks for everything. The formal distance in his voice broke my heart. We used to say, I love you, every time we talked, and now he was thanking me like I was a hotel concierge. I watched them disappear through the sliding doors into the terminal, Isabella's arm around Lucas's shoulders as she whispered something in his ear. David put his arm around me as I started crying right there in the departure drop-off area. It's going to be okay, he said, but his voice was tight with his own emotion. Amanda, what your mother did was terrible, but Lucas will grow up and see through her manipulation eventually. Will he? I sobbed. Or will he just remember that his sister chose America over family and never look back? The drive home was a blur of tears and heartbreak. When we walked into our house, it felt empty and echoing despite being full of our belongings and memories. Isabella and Lucas's presence had been so toxic that I'd forgotten how peaceful our home usually felt. I spent the rest of that day crying on and off, grieving not just the loss of my current relationship with Lucas but the future relationship we'd never have. I wouldn't be there when he graduated high school, when he went to college, when he fell in love, when he got married. Isabella had successfully created a wall between us that might never come down. David was incredibly patient and supportive, bringing me tea and holding me when the waves of sadness hit. But I could tell this whole experience had been difficult for him too. No one wants to watch their spouse's family systematically try to destroy their marriage and self-worth. I keep thinking about what Isabella said. I told him that evening as we sat on our couch. About family being forever and marriages sometimes ending. What if she's right? What if I chose wrong? David took my hands and looked directly into my eyes. Amanda, your mother tried to sabotage our marriage from the moment she got here. She attempted to have secret conversations with me about your past, she criticized our relationship constantly, and she spent 3 weeks trying to convince you that being happy with me was somehow a betrayal of your family. Does that sound like someone who has your best interests at heart? No, I admitted. But what if she's right about me changing too much? What if I really have lost touch with who I used to be? You've grown, David said firmly. You've become more confident, more independent, more sure of what you want from life. Those are good changes, Amanda. The person you were at 25 was lovely, but the person you are now is incredible. Over the following weeks, I tried to process what had happened and figure out how to move forward. Isabella and Lucas returned to their normal routine in Brazil, but our weekly phone calls became increasingly strained and infrequent. Isabella would make passive-aggressive comments about how busy I seemed, and Lucas became more and more monosyllabic until he eventually stopped joining the calls altogether. He's going through a difficult phase, Isabella would explain when I asked about him. Teenagers, you know. But I think the visit helped him understand some things about family and priorities. The implication was clear, Lucas had learned that I was selfish and disloyal, and he was naturally pulling away from me as a result. Isabella had gotten exactly what she wanted. The worst part was the way the whole experience made me doubt everything about my life. For weeks after they left, I'd catch myself analyzing my choices, wondering if Isabella was right about my priorities being wrong. I'd look around our beautiful house and wonder if it really was just material comfort keeping me in America. I'd watch David and me cooking dinner together and wonder if our partnership really was less meaningful than the traditional family structure Isabella valued. But gradually, with David's support and some sessions with a therapist who specialized in family dynamics, I began to see the situation more clearly. Isabella hadn't been trying to help me or protect me, she'd been trying to control me. She couldn't accept that I'd built a life without her input or approval, so she'd systematically tried to tear down everything that made me happy and confident. What your mother did was emotional abuse, my therapist explained during one of our sessions. She used your love for your brother as a weapon against you, and she tried to make you believe that your happiness was somehow selfish or wrong. Understanding the dynamic intellectually helped, but it didn't ease the pain of losing Lucas. He was 17 now, almost an adult, and I'd missed 2 crucial years of his development. The chances of rebuilding our relationship seemed to diminish with each passing month. I tried reaching out to him directly through social media and text messages, but he rarely responded, and when he did, his messages were polite but distant. Isabella had done her work well. She'd convinced him that my attempts to connect were manipulation, that I was trying to pull him away from his real family. Maybe when he's older he'll understand, David would say when I'd get upset after another failed attempt to reach Lucas. Maybe when he starts making his own adult choices, he'll realize how difficult it is to balance different parts of your life. Or maybe he'll just remember that when he needed me, I was too far away to help. I'd reply. Maybe Isabella's right that I chose wrong. But even as I said it, I knew it wasn't true. I hadn't chosen David over Lucas, I'd chosen to build a full, adult life that included both romantic love and family relationships. The fact that Isabella couldn't accept that choice didn't make it wrong. Now, almost 3 years later, I can see the whole situation more clearly. Isabella felt threatened by my independence and success, so she used Lucas as a weapon to try to force me back under her control. When her direct manipulation of David didn't work, she shifted tactics and went after my relationship with the person I loved most in the world. The strategy was brilliant in its cruelty. She knew that losing Lucas would devastate me more than any other threat or ultimatum. She knew that my guilt about leaving Brazil would make me vulnerable to accusations that I'd abandoned my family. And she knew that Lucas's teenage insecurity about our changing relationship would make him susceptible to her narrative about my supposed transformation. What she didn't count on was David's unwavering support and my own eventual recognition of what she was doing. Yes, I lost my relationship with Lucas, at least for now. But I kept my sense of self, my marriage, and my understanding of what healthy love actually looks like. Real love doesn't try to control or manipulate. Real love doesn't demand that you sacrifice your dreams to prove your loyalty. Real love doesn't turn family members against each other to maintain power and control. Isabella taught me that not all family relationships are worth preserving at any cost. Some people, even people we love deeply, can become toxic forces in our lives. And sometimes the most loving thing we can do for ourselves and the healthy relationships in our lives is to set boundaries, even when it's heartbreaking. I still hope that someday Lucas will see through Isabella's manipulation and reach out to rebuild our relationship. I hope that when he's older and has more life experience, he'll understand that growing up and building an independent life doesn't mean abandoning the people you love. But even if that never happens, I know I made the right choice. I chose love over control, growth over stagnation, and authenticity over manipulation. Isabella brought Lucas to America hoping to destroy my confidence and force me back under her influence. Instead, she helped me understand the difference between healthy family relationships and toxic ones. I brought my mom and brother from Brazil to visit me in the US, and I did end up emotionally destroyed in my own home. But I also ended up stronger, clearer about my values, and more grateful than ever for the people in my life who love me without conditions or ultimatums. David and I are still happily married, still building our life together in California. We're talking about starting our own family soon, and I know that the children we raise will grow up understanding that love means supporting each other's dreams, not trying to control or limit them. As for Isabella and Lucas, they're still in Brazil, still living the life that Isabella insists is the only real way to be happy. I send birthday cards and Christmas gifts that usually go unacknowledged, and I keep hoping that someday the door between us might open again. But I'm not waiting for that anymore. I'm not putting my life on hold or second-guessing my choices based on the possibility that they might someday approve of the path I've chosen. I learned that you can love people deeply and still refuse to let them destroy your peace. You can honor your family and your culture while also honoring your own growth and dreams. And sometimes the greatest act of love is refusing to participate in someone else's need to control your life. Isabella wanted me to choose between my family in Brazil and my life in America. But the real choice was between allowing her to manipulate me or standing up for my right to build the life that makes me happy. And in the end, that wasn't really a choice at all.